Have you ever heard of warriors who can only use their weapons at specific times? Throughout history, there are reports of individuals who receive divine or strategic permissions to employ powers or tools at crucial moments. But why can some weapons, whether literal or symbolic, only be used under certain circumstances? What does this teach us about destiny, strategy, and purpose? The idea of power granted by a higher authority appears in several traditions. In the Bible, there are reports of Samson, whose strength was linked to his vow as a Nazirite and disappeared if he broke his covenant. In feudal Japan, samurai followed Bushido, a code of conduct that dictated when and how the sword should be drawn. In modern times, we see examples such as the creation and use of the atomic bomb, which was allowed only under a specific context in World War II. This pattern is repeated in myths, religions, and even military decisions, a power that cannot be used at any time, but only when there is permission, when destiny or necessity dictate that the time is right. This leads us to reflect. What if this same logic applies to spiritual forces that can only be activated at the right moment? Spiritual weapons throughout history. In several cultures, there are reports of individuals who receive divine authorization to employ extraordinary powers or weapons. In Norse mythology, Thor couldn't simply swing his hammer Mjolnir as he pleased. There needed to be a legitimate reason, such as defending the gods or humans. Likewise, in Christianity, Jesus told his disciples not to act violently except in specific circumstances, such as the cleansing of the temple. Another notable example is that of Joan of Arc, the French peasant who claimed to receive divine messages to lead armies in the 100 Years' War. She didn't pick up a sword and simply go out fighting. First, she needed to receive signals and confirmations that her mission was authorized. Her permission came in the form of visions from saints who instructed her on when and how to act. This idea of permission transcends physical weapons and enters the field of knowledge and strategy. In times of war, generals only use advanced tactics when they know the time is right. In the American Revolution, George Washington was advised not to attack the British at certain times, as he knew that patience and correct positioning were essential. Be part of our spiritual family. Subscribe to the channel today and comment, "I believe" below, as a symbol that you accept your role in this great transition. Let your energy be counted among the chosen. The time is now. The concept of right time in spirituality. In the Hebrew tradition, there is the concept of kairos, a Greek term that refers to the exact and opportune moment for something to happen. Unlike chronological time, chronos, kairos is the right time, that instant in which everything aligns so that an action can be taken. Many spiritual beliefs follow this logic, suggesting that there are predestined times when certain forces can be released. The Book of Revelation, for example, talks about seals that can only be opened at the designated time. This means that even destructive forces have a precise time to act. This idea also appears in prophecies about the end of times, which talk about the release of forces that could not be awakened before the determined time. In addition to the religious sphere, we can observe this pattern in science and technology. The splitting of the atom was possible only when humanity reached a specific level of knowledge. If the secret of nuclear energy had been revealed centuries earlier, it would have been useless or even catastrophic. Technology, like a weapon, also requires permission to be used, not by a divine being, but by the scientific and ethical maturity of a society. Implications in the contemporary world. The notion that certain actions can only be taken at the right time is also relevant in modern contexts. Governments only activate nuclear weapons in extreme circumstances. Companies only reveal innovations when there is a market ready for them. Leaders only share certain truths when society is ready to hear them. An interesting case was Operation Overlord in World War II. The Allies had the power and strategy to invade Nazi-occupied France, but they waited for the exact moment to launch the attack. If they had acted before the right time, the operation would have failed. The success of D-Day depended on weather permitting, climatic conditions, and accumulated military intelligence. Even in psychology, we see that some personal changes only happen when the mind is prepared for them. The concept of psychological readiness explains why certain therapies or advice don't work until a person is truly ready to change. Just like the spiritual weapon in the analyzed script, the power of transformation is only activated when the right moment arrives. Human history is full of examples that show that power, whether physical, spiritual, or strategic, cannot be used at any time. It requires permission, whether from a leader, a moral code, or time itself. The concept of a weapon that can only be used under divine authorization is not just a metaphor, but a historical and spiritual pattern that is repeated in different cultures. Whether in the battles of legendary warriors, technological advances, or the decisions that shape the modern world, the truth remains: there is a right time to act. The challenge is to recognize when that moment arrives and be prepared to use it wisely. Your journey is just beginning. It's time to regain your strength and build a new path. Subscribe to the channel and be part of this community that is awakening to the truth. The weapon as a symbol of destiny. Since the dawn of humanity, weapons have not just been tools of war, but symbols of power, destiny, and authority. They carry deep meanings, whether of divine, scientific, or strategic origin. The idea of a weapon granted with special permission is a recurring theme in different cultures, supporting the notion that power cannot be used irresponsibly, but rather at the right time and in the right hands. Legendary weapons and the right to use them. Many myths and legends address special weapons that can only be used by chosen individuals. The classic example is Excalibur, King Arthur's sword. According to medieval legend, only the worthy would be able to pull the sword from the stone and thus rule England. This idea reflects a deep spiritual principle. Possession of a weapon is not enough. You must have a purpose for using it. Another iconic case comes from Hindu mythology, Shiva's bow, called Pinaka. This sacred bow was so powerful that only a divinely blessed warrior could wield it. In the epic Ramayana, only Prince Rama managed to lift and shoot the bow, proving to be chosen for his mission. These examples reinforce the idea that a powerful weapon requires an equally extraordinary wielder. In the Nordic tradition, Thor's hammer, Mjolnir, could not be carried by anyone. It was a symbol of divine protection and could only be wielded by the thunder god or those judged worthy by the gods. In addition to being a combat tool, the hammer was also used to bless events and protect the innocent. These narratives show that access to a gun is not a universal right, but rather a privilege reserved for those who have proven their worth and who have a greater purpose for their use. Historical weapons and when to use them. It's not just myths that portray weapons as symbols of destiny. World history also records cases of military technologies that were used at critical moments, changing the course of civilizations. One of the most striking examples was the atomic bomb, used at the end of the Second World War. The Manhattan Project, which resulted in the creation of the first nuclear bomb, was a secret kept under lock and key by the United States. The decision to use it occurred only when the government considered that there was no other alternative to ending the war. On August 6th and 9th, 1945, the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were hit, forcing Japan to surrender on August 15th of the same year. Although controversial, this decision reflects the idea that certain weapons can only be used under extreme circumstances. They are not simply tools of destruction, but instruments of historical change. The same principle can be observed in the invention of gunpowder, which revolutionized warfare in the Middle Ages, and in the creation of biological weapons, which can only be used in specific strategic scenarios. Another emblematic case was the Espada de Goujian, a Chinese blade found in 1965 and dated to around 500 BC. This sword has remained intact for more than 2,500 years and is considered a masterpiece of metallurgy. According to historical accounts, it belonged to King Goujian of Yue and was used only in battles where the survival of the kingdom was at stake. This reinforces the idea that weapons of great power should be reserved for critical moments. Power as burden, the bearer's dilemma. Possession of a powerful weapon not only brings advantages, but also moral and strategic weight. This is seen in both fiction and reality. In literature, one of the most symbolic examples is The One Ring, the saga The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. Although not a weapon in the traditional sense, the ring granted immense power to its bearer, but at the cost of corrupting their soul. The only way to prevent it from falling into the wrong hands was to destroy it, and that responsibility fell on an unlikely bearer, Frodo, an ordinary but morally upright hobbit. In politics and war, we see similar dilemmas. World leaders who possess nuclear arsenals cannot use them indiscriminately, as this would cause irreparable destruction. The same is true with advanced artificial intelligence and biotechnology technologies. The decision to use them cannot be made without ethical and strategic consideration. In recent history, a notable example was the 1962 missile crisis, where the United States and the Soviet Union came to the brink of nuclear war. The capacity for mutual destruction was present, but President John F. Kennedy and Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev decided to retreat at the last moment. This illustrates that power must be wielded responsibly, a central theme in any narrative about weapons granted by special permission. The idea of a weapon that can only be used under certain conditions is not just a fictional concept, but a reflection of human history itself. From Excalibur to Hiroshima, passing through divine weapons and strategic military decisions, this theme repeats itself in an impressive way. Having power does not necessarily mean being able to use it at any time. The real challenge for great leaders, warriors and historical figures has always been to know when and as use your weapons. Whether on the battlefield, in diplomacy or in technological development, the balance between strength and responsibility remains one of humanity's greatest tests. In the next chapters, we will explore how this idea manifests itself in the contemporary world and what the philosophical implications are of a power that needs permission to be activated. Share this knowledge with the world. Together, we can spread this message and help more people become free. Subscribe to the channel and send this video to anyone who needs to hear this truth. Confrontation between superior forces. Throughout history, the concept of war has never been limited to the physical plane. Invisible conflicts between superior forces are mentioned in several traditions, suggesting that there is a reality beyond what the eye can perceive. But what does this spiritual battle mean? Who are the combatants? What are the weapons used in this silent struggle that, according to ancient beliefs, shape the destiny of humanity? The conflict between good and evil. In spiritual traditions, many beliefs portray the existence of a continuous confrontation between opposing forces, light and darkness, order and chaos, truth and lies. These narratives vary from culture to culture, but the essence remains the same. Not Christianity, Battle in the Sky, described in the Book of Revelation, narrates a cosmic clash between Michael and his angels against Lucifer and his rebellious legions. This event symbolizes the struggle between divine justice and rebellion, being a powerful metaphor for the constant conflict between righteousness and corruption in humanity. In Persian mythology, the Zoroastrianism presents the concept of cosmic dualism between Ahura Mazda, the god of light and wisdom, and Angra Mainyu, the entity of evil and destruction. This spiritual confrontation does not only happen in heaven, but also within the human mind and actions, demonstrating that each individual is part of this struggle when choosing between right and wrong. In Hinduism, the war between the Devas, celestial beings, and the Asuras, dark forces, is recurrent in sacred texts such as the Mahabharata. Conflict is not just about physical battles, but also about spiritual challenges that test the faith, loyalty, and self-control of those involved. These stories are not just mythological tales, but reflections of the internal struggle that each person faces daily. Good and evil are not just abstract forces, they are choices, paths, and consequences. The battle in the invisible, the spiritual world and its combatants. For those who believe in the spiritual world, the clash between these forces is not just symbolic, but an active reality that influences the physical world. This invisible war involves superior entities that fight for the destiny of human souls. In several traditions, there is mention of angels and demons that wage conflicts at different levels of existence. In the book of Daniel 10:12-14, an angel messenger was delayed by an evil spirit prince until the archangel Michael came to help him. This suggests that there are battles raging in unknown dimensions, directly affecting events in the material world. In Islam, the concept of jihad, it has a spiritual aspect that represents the internal struggle against evil inclinations and temptations. This combat is not external, but a war within the soul itself, seeking purification and connection with the divine. Another perspective comes from African traditions, such as the belief in orishas and guardian spirits, which protect and guide humans against forces that attempt to divert their lives from spiritual balance. The connection between these spiritual guides and their protégés directly influences the path each person takes. Whatever the tradition, the essence remains. The spiritual battle is not just a metaphor, but a real and constant struggle that influences events around us. Spiritual weapons, how to prepare a warrior. If there is a spiritual war, then there are weapons suitable for this type of combat. But unlike physical wars, where swords and firearms are used, spiritual confrontation requires different tools, invisible but extremely powerful weapons. Christianity, for example, describes the armor of God, mentioned in Ephesians 6:11-17. In it, elements such as the helmet of salvation, the shield of faith, and the sword of the Spirit are presented as means of defense and attack against evil forces. In Buddhism, the true spiritual weapon is the disciplined mind. Training to overcome the illusions and temptations of the material world occurs through meditation and mastery of emotions. Inner peace is seen as the most powerful tool for triumphing over destructive forces. In Jewish tradition, the study of Torah and the practice of prayer are considered spiritual shields. Knowledge and connection with God strengthens the individual against negative influences. These elements show that spiritual warfare is not won by brute force, but by mental, emotional, and spiritual preparation. The reflection of spiritual battle in the history of humanity. Many historical events can be interpreted as manifestations of this invisible conflict. Liberation movements, spiritual reforms, and challenges faced by visionary leaders often reflect struggles that go beyond the material plane. For example, the fall of the Roman Empire in the 5th century AD was not just a political event, but the end of an era where values and beliefs were tested. Christianity, once persecuted, emerged as the main religion of the West, drastically altering the direction of history. Another relevant case was the Protestant Reformation, begun by Martin Luther in 1517. The confrontation between the authority of the Catholic Church and religious reformers was not limited to theological debates. It was a battle of principles and changes that shaped the modern world. In more recent times, the civil rights movement in the United States, led by Martin Luther King Jr., can be seen as a spiritual battle against oppression and racism. King, influenced by Christian teachings, preached peaceful resistance, showing that true strength lies not in violence, but in faith and justice. These examples show that, throughout history, there have always been battles that went beyond politics and war. They were conflicts of ideologies, values, and principles that shaped the course of humanity. Spiritual warfare is not a fantasy. It is a reality that is reflected in the choices, conflicts, and challenges faced daily. Whether in mythological narratives, religious beliefs, or historical events, the struggle between superior forces and their reflections on humanity is a constant theme. The real battlefield is not just in the sky or in hidden dimensions, but in each person's heart and mind. As a spiritual warrior, each individual must decide what weapons they will use, what values they will defend, and what side of history they will be on. In the next chapters, we will explore the strategies used in this clash and how human decisions directly influence the course of this invisible war. If you feel this calling within you, subscribe to the channel and write "I am chosen" in the comments. Declare that you are ready to receive what is already in store for you. The use of spiritual weapons, only under authorization. Since ancient times, humanity has sought to understand the concept of power. But not all power can be used freely. If there is anything common in the spiritual and philosophical traditions of the world, it is the notion that certain gifts, abilities, or weapons can only be employed under one essential condition: authorization from the supreme source. This idea raises an intriguing question. Why do even those who believe they possess great spiritual strength need to wait for the right moment to act? Heavenly authority over the use of power. If we analyze sacred texts and mythologies, we will realize that on several occasions, characters received immense powers but had to wait for the exact moment to use them. This divine permission is a principle that defines not only the destiny of the chosen ones, but also the dynamics of the spiritual battle itself. In the Judeo-Christian tradition, one of the most striking examples of this permission can be found in the story of David and Goliath. David, a simple shepherd, was not a trained warrior. However, in 1 Samuel 17, he receives divine permission to face the Philistine giant. The curious thing here is that David already had skill with the sling, but his victory was not just due to his skill. It was only possible because he was authorized to fight in that circumstance. Another significant episode occurs in Exodus, when Moses receives from God the order to free the Hebrew people. Before that, he already had an influential position in Egypt and intellectual abilities, but his mission could only be fulfilled when there was permission from the Creator. The use of the staff to part the Red Sea was not a magic trick, but an act authorized by divine power. This idea of permission is also present in the New Testament. Jesus, when tempted in the desert, refuses to turn stones into bread, even though he has the power to do so. The reason? The order to act did not come from God, but from the adversary's attempted manipulation. In other traditions, such as Hinduism, the use of astral weapons follows the same logic. Prince Arjuna, protagonist of the Mahabharata, could only use the divine weapons granted by the gods at the right time and under the set conditions. Power was available, but access was restricted until permission from above was granted. When power is granted, the role of patience and preparation. The question that arises is, why is permission necessary? If someone already has ability and strength, why can't they just use them? The answer lies in preparation. Power without control or maturity can be destructive. Many historical and mythological events show what happens when someone tries to access skills or knowledge without being properly ready. In the Christian tradition, a classic example of this is the story of Samson. His extraordinary physical power was granted to him by God, but when he disobeyed the principles that guaranteed his strength, he lost his combat ability. He only recovered it when, in repentance and obedience, he was again given permission to act. In Buddhism, there is a similar principle. Spiritual knowledge and abilities can only be given to a disciple when he demonstrates self-control and understanding. An example of this is the legend of the young monk who wanted to master advanced spiritual combat techniques, but only gained access to them after years of discipline and learning. Modern history also shows us examples of this dynamic. Let's think about the scientists who discovered nuclear energy. Knowledge existed, but its application brought both advances and destruction. The Second World War demonstrated that power used without control can cause irreversible impacts, and this raises a warning about the need for wisdom when dealing with forces that can transform reality. What happens when power is used without permission? Another essential point in this concept is what happens when individuals try to use spiritual abilities or weapons without authorization. Biblical tradition mentions cases such as the sons of Sceva, Acts 19:13-16, who attempted to cast out evil spirits without being properly prepared or authorized. The result was disastrous. They were attacked and left injured. In ancient mythologies, there are several stories about people who sought to access forbidden secrets without permission. A famous case is that of Icarus from Greek mythology. He was given wings made of wax to fly, but was warned not to get too close to the sun. Ignoring the warning, he tried to go beyond the established limits and ended up falling. In modern times, we see people who attempt to manipulate spiritual forces without proper knowledge or protection. Accounts of individuals who explore mystical practices without adequate preparation often mention unexpected consequences, reinforcing the idea that power needs to be granted responsibly. How to know when permission is given? The big question then is, how do you know when the right time to act is? There are some signs that, according to different traditions, indicate when power can be used. Clear order of source of authority. Whether it is a spiritual revelation, a divine calling, or a deep understanding, the individual feels certain that the time has come. Maturity and preparation. Whoever receives the permission has usually already gone through tests, challenges, and refinement processes. Greater purpose. The use of power is not for one's own benefit, but to fulfill a specific mission that will bring balance and justice. External confirmation. Permission is often validated by external events or by others who share the same spiritual vision. The concept of divine permission teaches an essential lesson about patience, responsibility, and purpose. It is not enough to have knowledge or skills. You need to know when and how to use them. History shows us that those who wait for the right moment and act under guidance achieve great things, while those who try to use power without authorization face disastrous consequences. True strength is not just in what you can do, but in knowing when and why to act. The spiritual battle is not won with weapons alone, but with discernment and obedience to the superior laws that govern the universe. The awakening continues. If this video opened your eyes to truths you had never seen before, imagine what else you can discover. Subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications so you don't miss any content that will transform your life.